So we're really happy to have Surya Gunasekar visiting us to give the camp colloquium this week. So Surya and I actually overlapped briefly when she was at UT Austin. So she started off working in ECE in UT Austin, graduated in 2016. Okay, 2016, and has since then been a research assistant professor at KPIC. Now, before I actually sort of briefly say what you're going to talk about, so a small side story. So a few days back, I was talking to someone in statistics, and I was telling him what I work on, and I said something like, I have these problems where I have many controls and I keep changing them very often. Which if you do some stochastic controls makes perfect sense, but the statistician was very sort of horrified at the thought of changing controls. Now, many of us sort of keep having this sense of there are certain technical terms which we use and which mean something, and then as soon as you go and tell that term to someone else, it means something completely different. Very few of us actually take the same technical term with the different meanings in different fields and actually works on both the problems in different fields. Surya is one of these rare people. So if you see a topic like implicit bias in learning, I'm sure most of you are thinking about things like fairness and bias and discrimination, unless you're a statistician, in which case you're thinking about something completely different. Surya actually thinks about both of these, so she's done a lot of work in thinking about fairness and discrimination in learning. This is not a talk about it. This is the talk for the statistician's version of implicit bias. So, let's find out what that is.
My first 2 minutes of the talk. Do you want to give the rest of the talk? Yeah, I did realize it as I was writing my research statement and also talking to people here that I'm using implicit bias with two different implications in 2 different set of works. But this work has nothing to do with social and ethical aspects of anything. It's just optimization and machine learning, so just mathematics for today. And speaking of misleading names, I come from PTI Chicago, which has Toyota in its name, and again, it doesn't have anything to do with Toyota the company, or it has very little to do with Toyota the company. It's an independent academic institution. If you are looking for research faculty positions or even grad schools and stuff, it's a great place to be here in machine learning. So today I'll be talking about like the statistical implicit bias of machine learning and of optimization in machine learning. This is based on a bunch of joint work. Primarily, this was guided by my mentor in PTI, Nadi Sribro, and I closely collaborated with Jason and Daniel from USC and Technion. And I've also worked on a few projects with Moore and Leto, who are students at Technion and TDIC. And you can see here that the resolution seems to grow proportional to the seniority of the people involved. And sorry for the bad photos of the students. So I'll start with briefly placing machine learning or supervised machine learning in the context in which I'll be using today. So supervised machine learning is essentially a prediction task. I have some input features or data or measurements which I call as X, and I'll be using features and inputs to refer to X. And with each such X, I want to associate some label which I'm going to denote by Y. Okay? And for example, the input could be an image of handwritten digits or some typed out digits from typewriters long time back, and the output could be the ASCII value of the digit. Or something more complicated, the input could be a sentence in English, and the output could be the corresponding sentence in Dutch. Sorry, I couldn't read the sentence. It has a nice pun in it. Maybe I can share the slide later and get credit. But for today's talk, we're not doing fancy translation problems. We are going to look at inputs which are just D numbers, and output is going to be just one number. It could either span any number in real number line, or in some cases, which we call as classification problems, it will just take 2 values, +1 and -1. Okay? So our goal is to, for each X, associate a prediction so that it closely approximates Y. So what do I mean by that? So I want to find a mapping F, which takes in as an input my features or input X, and spits out a prediction which approximates Y. To formally define what the approximation here, or what a good approximation here is, the goal is to have a small generalization error. Don't worry, I won't use generalization too often, but essentially what I want is like I have the input, I assume that the inputs are now, the labels come from some distribution, which I denote as D. I won't be using D also much. And the goal is to find a function which has a small loss between the prediction and the label over random draws of x and y. Okay? You don't have to parse this expression exactly, but just know that this is some loss which is dependent on the distribution, and generally we don't know the distribution. So how do we go about finding this f? So we don't know the distribution. So instead what we start by doing is collect some data or examples of xy pair, which we assume comes from this distribution, and call this set of examples as training data. So we want to use this training data to approximately minimize or approximately solve our goal, which is minimizing the loss over the random draws of the distribution itself. And now for many reasons, including computation and for various other reasons I won't go into, it's never a good idea to optimize over all functions from mapping from x to y. And instead we will restrict our function class to a small subset of all the functions. In particular, we'll be looking at functions which are parameterized by some p parameters, and in the rest of the talk I'll denote the parameters I'm restricting the class by using w. Okay, and for every such w, which is just denotes p numbers, there is a corresponding function which maps input x to y. Okay. And the next task is essentially to select a good function from this class. So I have decided that my good function comes from this class, and the goal is to find what the good function is. Okay? Remember, our main goal was to minimize the objective over the distribution, but we don't have access to the distribution. Instead, we treat whatever samples we gathered as examples drawn independently from the distribution. And many times we don't have independent samples, and many times the samples are not large enough. But we can roughly see that at least when the draws are independent and n is large, the objective here approximates my true goal. Okay? And this is one of the most popular ways of selecting a good function, is to write an optimization problem over the training data, which is the examples we collected, and find the optimum of that, and you see if that is a good solution or not. Okay? So this is in terms of how we define the objective, but once we define an objective, we also want to solve this optimization problem. And typical component, a very important component of learning systems is how we choose, what algorithm we choose to optimize this problem. Okay, we have written down an objective, and then typically you use some form of gradient or stochastic gradient descent or some other algorithm to solve this optimization problem. And the final component of a learning system, just to complete the picture, is to see whether the solution I get from optimizing this objective actually does well on my true goal. And the way we do that is, again, generate a totally new set of examples and see if my learned predictor does well on the new set of examples. So this is a rough machine learning pipeline. And today's talk I'll mainly be focusing on the part about optimization, where we want to select a good function from a class of from a class we previously specified, and we want to find a function such that it also and we want to be able to reason about how well this will do on my true goal. Okay, but I'll mainly be focusing on that. So let's look at this objective once more. Let's say this objective actually satisfies all the nice properties. That is, we have lots of data such that this is a good approximation of the goal. Then all we care about is how do I minimize this objective, right? And we do that by picking an algorithm. And what are the considerations for picking an algorithm? This is just a traditional optimization problem. And all I want to do is minimize it. I can pick any algorithm which, with various considerations like computation, accuracy, how well will I minimize it, how quickly can I minimize it, what are the memory resources, and how susceptible am I to some kind of errors and so on. So there is an entire, any literature on optimization is applicable here too. Okay? And in particular, one optimization algorithm which is very commonly used in machine learning systems is gradient descent. Okay? And I want to, before going into my problem statement, I want to briefly review what gradient descent is. So essentially, I want to find W hat. The way I'll do it is I start with a guess of W hat. It could be a random guess, it doesn't have to be something specific. I start with some W0 and iteratively update my estimation of what my true minimizer is. And the way I iteratively update is, from any point, I look at the gradient direction and then move along the negative gradient direction by some fixed step size length. I don't know if some of the fonts are visible. If something is not clear, please let me know. And and I'll be happy to go over it. And the idea is, like, you have a value kind of a loss function, you start at some point, you go down a gradient direction, you make a small step, and keep making these steps, and under some conditions, you can show that it will converge to the minimizer of the problem. Okay? And this simple algorithm is a component of many machine learning systems, and it has been around forever, and there are many benefits to using something like this. It's fast, easy, simple, and it's versatile, works for most problems we care about in machine learning. And in fact, even most modern machine learning systems, with a few exceptions, primarily rely on some variants of this gradient descent method, which is stochastic or accelerated versions of it, which are very popular. But theoretically, this algorithm is very well understood early in the setting of convex smooth functions, where we know that this algorithm will eventually lead you to a minimizer. Okay? But it is, in spite of lack of theory, this is popularly used even in non-convex optimization. Okay? But let's take a step back. We wanted to minimize an objective, and let's say we can pick an algorithm which will converge to a global minimizer of the objective. Okay? But in today's talk, we want to look at, and there is a ton of optimization literature on how to do this, and today's talk will specifically look at a case where the objective has multiple minimizers, or multiple global minima. I'm not talking about locally minimized local minimizers, but this objective written here has multiple solutions which will give you 0 errors. Okay? 0 is just because I'm assuming the loss is bounded between 0 and 1, and it's a bit of an arbitrary term. This by itself is not a problem, but what if the objective has multiple minimizers, but multiple minimizers, among the multiple minimizers, some of them are better for the goal I care about while the others are not. Okay? So that is a setting where simply minimizing this objective doesn't tell me anything about how well I'm going to do on the goal. Okay? And that is precisely the setting we'll be focusing on today. So just to summarize, when can this happen? Like as I said before, if I have enough training data, this wouldn't happen. If I have lots and lots of training data, in particular if I have infinite training data, these two solutions will converge to each other. So if I'm minimizing the original loss, I'm also minimizing the goal I care about. But in many modern machine learning systems, we work in the setting called over-parameterized or underdetermined system, where the number of examples I have is much smaller than the number of parameters or the function class over which I'm optimizing over. As a result, I have many more solutions of the original problem, which are pretty bad for the second, the goal I care about, which is minimizing the loss over x.
So you're still making the assumption that if something is not a local minima of the origin of the top version, then you don't care about that one, right?
Those could still be good solutions for the remaining problem, but usually, we are not looking into those solutions. Because we are assuming that our algorithm is doing its job properly and giving you a solution which is a global minimum of the original problem. Okay. So it is possible that there are solutions which are not optimum of the original problem, which are good for the goal I care about, but we are not looking at those subset of problems. We are specifically going to look at what happens if I do have an algorithm which does give me a global minimizer, but I cannot say anything more about the global minimizer I can talk about because I don't know anything about. I know that some of the global minimizers are better than the other for the problem. Okay. An example which will revisit quite a bit, or at least in the first part, is underdetermined least squares, where it's just a least squares objective, linear least squares objective, where the number of constraints is smaller than the number of parameters I want to estimate. So here you can clearly see that there are many values of W which will give me 0 error. And if I don't tell anything about how the true W star from which the data is generated looks like, in some sense I cannot say which one of the solutions is a good solution. Because for every good solution you give me, I can come up with a distribution where that solution would be bad. Right? But I can always reason about what are the properties of different global minima for this problem. Okay? And once I know what are the properties of different global minima, I can reason about what distributions under which that global minima is good. Right? Like, as Eva said, we're still not talking about what happens if I don't optimize this objective fully and stop early. Like, do I get good generalization? It's possible, but we won't be answering that question at least in today's talk. And actually, I'll briefly allude to what happens to something like that towards the end of the talk as a future work. Okay. So for now, let's say that all our optimizers converge to a global minimizer. So I'm only going to look at the set of all minimizers and see which one, what are the properties of different minimizers. We'll look at a particularly interesting case of this least squares objective, where so here is just a restatement of our previous least squares objective, where parameter, the variable over which we are optimizing is a matrix valued variable. Okay, so your features are also matrix. Features are xn, which are matrices. Your parameters w is also a matrix. Both are in d by d space. Square matrix just for convenience. It doesn't have to be. And my measurements are essentially obtained by taking an inner product between the feature matrix and my predictions are essentially inner product between feature matrix and the parameters. Okay. And I have some observations from some true distribution, and I want to minimize this loss. It's just a squared loss over matrix valued variables. Okay? And a classic example to keep in mind, this is in fact a setting for many interesting problems like matrix sensing, multitask learning. Many problems can be cast in this way, but easiest to think about is matrix completion, where you can think of the features as individual entries of the matrix, or features as individual indicator variables over individual entries of the matrix. And my measurements is like there is some true underlying W star, and I observe few of the entries of W star. Okay? At least for matrix completion, this optimization problem as written here is completely pointless, because all it's asking me to do is to fill in the observed entries with values which are close to the observed entries. Right? And I can do it in very trivial ways. In particular, this is a setting where the number of observations is smaller than the number of parameters, so the optimization is underdetermined. And particularly for matrix completion, I don't even have to solve this problem. I know what is a good solution for this problem. I can fill it in remaining entries with 0, 42 or anything. All of them are valid global minimizers for this problem. Okay? But people do study matrix completion, and in fact, like it is one of the widely studied topics, and much of my PhD work was based on matrix completion too. And we didn't study a pointless problem. We did study a more useful problem where, in addition to the subjective, we had some kind of low rank constraint on the underlying matrix. So the true matrix we wanted to understand was low rank matrix, and that's why people study matrix completion. And at least in an applied point of view, one of the popular ways to find a low rank matrix for this problem is to write the true matrix W as an outer product between two low rank matrices U and V. So U and V will be thin matrices D by R, where R is small, and write it in this form. And now this objective written down is a non-convex objective because of the rank constraint. But if I do solve the solution, if I do find a solution which fits the training data, which fits the observations and also is low rank, that will be a good solution. I mean, at least if my assumption that the ground truth is low rank is true. Okay? But today we are not going to do that. We are not going to optimize over low rank matrices. We are going to optimize over full rank matrices. Okay? So I am not putting any constraints on the UV matrix. So no rank constraint, no explicit regularization. I haven't defined regularization, but just think of it as other constraints on the U. Okay? No constraints. So these two problems are exactly equivalent. Any trivial global minima for the original problem is also a trivial global minima for the new problem. And all I have done is like take a simple, nice looking least squares problem and lay it non-convex. I mean, it still doesn't make sense to solve this optimization problem. But we'll look at what happens when I do solve this optimization problem using gradient descent. Okay? In particular, I'll be looking at two algorithms. One will do gradient descent on the original objective as is, like in the W space, and the other will do gradient descent on the factorized space. Okay? Remember that both of these are still solving the same problem. I'm just using two different ways to solve the same problem. And one of them is a convex objective where I am guaranteed to find a global minimizer. The second one, it's not so tricky, although there are some results which show that when I don't put a rank constraint, you do find a global minimizer. But let's say when we run this algorithm in datasets, we almost always find global minimizers. Okay? But let's look at what these two algorithms do for a specific example. We have a toy example with small number of dimensions and data. I run these two algorithms on the same objective, and what I find is like they're doing the job of optimizing correctly. So you can barely see the lines on the right hand side, which is both algorithms are giving me 0 training error. So both algorithms are giving me 0 loss over the objective they are optimizing over. They are giving me global minimizers. But what is more interesting is that doing gradient descent on the factors also gives me solutions which give me a good test error. Remember, the test error is something how well the solution does on new set of samples, which was not in the objective. Okay? So for some reason, doing gradient descent on U and V seems to be doing something more special, so that I also get smaller error on new samples which I haven't seen before, at least for this problem. So here I know that the new samples are also generated from a low rank ground truth matrix. So in some sense, it's doing something more special than what it was asked to do, right? And even more so, so in this algorithm, the way I chose the step size, which is how much I move in the gradient direction, by searching over all, finding the maximum step so that I'm still decreasing velocity. Okay, so some version of line search going on there. But even more so, if I don't do line search and I just pick up a small step size, small enough step size, and fix it, I get to a solution which has even better test error. Okay? So what's happening here? I have 3 different algorithms optimizing the same objective. All of them are doing the optimization part correctly in a sense that they're giving me 0 training error. Okay? But what is obvious is that all 3 are giving me different solutions because the solutions written by these algorithms have different test error. And more so, like doing gradient descent on U and V seems to be doing something special for this problem. Okay? In fact, we'll later see that all of these algorithms are doing something special. It so happens that the special thing U and V is doing is good for low rank problems. Okay? But the overall big picture idea is like even though we specified an objective and optimizing the objective, just because the objective is underdetermined, choosing a specific algorithm implicitly biases us towards like favoring certain types of solution more than the other, right? So in particular, doing gradient descent on U and V seems to be favoring some solutions which are good for low rank problems. And we want to understand this connection between how the choice of algorithm or how choice of parameterization affects what kind of solutions we end up favoring. Okay, and that is bigger picture question we are asking. And as to why we are asking the question, because like what I did here seems to be completely made up. In a sense, I just took a problem where I knew how to solve the problem. I knew low rank was the correct thing, and I could. Many people, including myself, have spent time trying to see how you can solve the low rank problem efficiently. But I'm telling you to ignore all the literature and do something different. Okay? But the point is not to do something different. The point is to understand this connection. And the reason we want to understand this connection is because these kind of over-parameterized models are extremely popular in neural networks, which are one of the popular and quite successful systems which are used in machine learning these days. Okay? Just
So the previous slide, how does the regulatory distribution okay.
Few more slides. Okay. 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 So I'll come back and answer that question in a few more slides. So let's look at what neural networks are. I just start with I want to, as I said, like I want to start with an input x and I want to learn a function which maps x to something like y, right? And neural networks are a specific way of learning this function. In particular, you can think of them as composition. I start with x. I take a linear combination of the inputs and apply some form of nonlinearity to it. Okay? And the hope is that this is a refined version of x, and you can treat this as my new x prime. And I keep doing it for a few iterations, and then I come up with, after some L, which is called the depth of the network, L layers, I end up with the L compositions of the original x. Okay? You can treat the final version as some feature map from input to x. And finally, to get to y, I just take a linear combination like the original, like a simple linear. Okay? So this is just a specific way of parameterizing a function from x to y. Okay? Which seems to, which at least has a lot of applications where it is showing performance which are not explainable by the current theory. Okay? In particular, let's look at an example of like what typical neural network literature looks like. So this is from almost like 3-4 years back. The data set which many people commonly use in vision is called ImageNet, which has about 1 million images with corresponding labels. 1 million images seems like a lot. But if you look at the networks which people use for these tasks, the number of parameters which which are learned is like orders of magnitude higher. So we have a 60 to 100 times over parameterization for this model. Okay? As a result, if we actually write down this objective of minimizing, finding a good parameters for the neural network subject, which would minimize the loss over the training examples, what we observe is that, I mean, a common problem which many people are aware of is that this objective is non-convex. That means we don't have efficient ways to solve it. But even bigger problem is that this objective has many global minima, most of which will be nonsensical for the task. Like they will generalize very poorly if I give it a new example. I can find global minima for this problem which are very bad for test error. Okay, and this is irrespective of the first problem of it being non-convex. I'm assuming that even if you find me a non-efficient algorithm and give me a global minima, there is a chance that it's not a good global minima. Okay? And if we go back to conventional wisdom in learning, whenever this kind of over-parameterization happens, what we end up doing is like either go back and scale down the number of the class size or the size of functions we are looking at, or add some form of explicit constraints on the parameters. Okay, so these constraints are again defined by some prior knowledge of like, I mean, from the domain you probably want to say that certain kinds of solutions are better than the other, and you want to add explicit constraints. So these explicit constraints are sometimes called regularizers. So if I've used it before, this is what I was referring to. So instead of just optimizing the empirical loss, you optimize over the empirical loss plus regularization. But at least for neural network, what ends up happening is like if I try to scale back and try to learn smaller networks or add a very strong regularizer, we don't end up having, A, we don't get global minima, and B, we don't end up with solutions which generalize well. Okay? So in some sense, what seems to be a working recipe for neural network is to throw away these conventional wisdom and instead, at least in vision tasks, which I have played with, instead just train extremely large networks with simple algorithms like gradient descent or stochastic versions of that. Okay?
Small, how much step do you reduce?
If you try to reduce it to 2 layers or 3 layers, it doesn't work. And at some point, it stops working, and the larger seems to give you better results anyway. And at least in vision networks, which I have implemented. And it seems to be like very larger over-parameterized models with simple variants of stochastic gradient descent, usually with some optimization hacks, seems to do remarkably well in practice, even though with the current theory we have no reason why this should be the case. And part of the goal of understanding the connection between optimization algorithms and how its role in over-parameterized models is to understand why this is happening. Okay? In particular, the simple recipe I just mentioned, it returns zero error solutions. That means zero error solutions are indeed global minima for this problem. It returns zero error solution. And surprisingly also have small test error. As I said, zero error solutions are not necessarily good for generalization. And this happens even without explicit regularization or any form of early stopping where you stop the solution before it converges to a global minima. Okay? And this has been empirically studied in some of the earlier work. Right? So even though the practitioners would say that they use explicit regularization, that usually adds only a marginal value above and over what simple gradient descent will give you. There are definitely exceptions to this, but this does happen in many problems. And even more so, when I use different optimization algorithms, like different variants of even gradient descent, stochastic gradient descent, I end up solutions with different test error, even though they are optimizing the same objective. And this has also been specifically studied in the context of neural networks by few of the past work, where they empirically evaluate that changing different parameterizations of the model, of the algorithm changes what test error you get. And typically the plots look like the example plot I have given here, which is, if you look at the training error, 2 algorithms will both converge to the global minima with 0 training error, whereas one will converge to a solution with higher test error than the other. Okay? And this clearly says that there is a role optimization plays in learning. In particular, we have also seen a variant of it in our own talk before with matrix factorization, where we saw that different optimization algorithms lead you to different solutions with different generalizations. And more generally, the implicit bias of optimization essentially looks like this. You can think of this cartoon picture of a hill climbing algorithm. There are many global minima at the bottom of the hill, and depending upon which path you choose to optimize over, you end up with, you are implicitly biased towards different solutions, and because you are learning different solutions, they could be very different models. And depending upon how this loss surface looks like for the global objective, like our ultimate goal, some of these might generalize better than the others. And that is how different algorithms will end up with different test errors. Okay? And the motivation behind understanding the implicit bias of optimization is like to actually really understand what and how over-parameterized models are learned. Simply saying that I wrote an empirical objective and I used gradient descent doesn't tell me anything about what I am learning. Okay? There is something special these models are learning, and we want to understand what is the special thing that's learning. Okay? If the lofty goal of understanding what's happening in neural networks is not sufficient, this could, in fact, like if you understand what is happening, we can find better ways to do it, because something is happening which we didn't necessarily consciously incorporate it into the objective, but if we knew that something good is happening, we can find better ways to actually incorporate it into the objective by explicit regularization or better optimization algorithms, which will take into account the factor I want to optimize over to, and which could also probably lead us to algorithms to efficiently train smaller networks. Okay. So to pose it in a very mathematical framework, I'm just going to abstract all the neural network stuff out. That was just for motivation. I have this optimization problem where the optimization objective has multiple global minima, and different algorithms lead to specific global minima. And the question we want to answer is what special type of global minima does different algorithm lead to? And another related goal is like we really care about how well this will do on the test data set. So we want to see what these special type of global minima mean for how well I'll do on the unseen data. Okay? So at least for all the results I'll be presenting today, the second part of, once the answer to the first is known, the second part is already studied. So in today's talk, I'm going to just focus on the first part of answering this question. So once I know these questions, I already have enough literature to say that, okay, there are these kind of distributions under which these solutions, special types of solutions are good. So I will not be talking much about the second question. So we'll start our analysis by a simple objective, which is just squared loss over my function class. If this is a regression problem, again I have my y is any real value, and I'm just minimizing a squared loss over my training data. And there are many, we'll be looking at settings where there are many global minima with zero error, where the constraints are exactly matched. That is what my function predicts exactly the true label. And the algorithm will start by looking at is gradient descent, which I briefly overviewed already. The question is, of course, which specific global minimum does gradient descent on the objective converge to? Okay? And we'll look at a very special case of the neural network I talked about, and that is just simple linear models. Okay? So there are no neural networks, it's a simple linear model, it's a least squares objective, and convex, there's no non-convexity, everything is nice. Okay? And for this model, like we can write down the gradient descent objective, and what we can actually show, and I will show in the next slide, is that when I optimize this objective using gradient descent update, which I talked about earlier, and suppose I initialize the gradient descent update with 0, what I will converge to is a very special minimum, which is among all the solutions which give me 0 error, I'll pick the one which has minimum L2 norm. Okay? So even though I have not specified L2 norm anywhere in the objective, you can see that the gradient descent, just doing gradient descent on this problem gives me minimum L2 norm solution for it. Okay? And this precise connection is what we would be constantly referring to as implicit bias of optimization. It is implicitly biasing towards certain favorable solutions. Okay? And more generally, if I don't start with 0, you can show that the solution I'll converge to is the solution which is closest to initialization. Right? And for this problem, and only for this problem, the proof is a very simple observation, which is that if I write the gradients of, so what's happening, I have some constraint optimization problem. I'm doing optimization over a d-dimensional space, which is very large, but the way I'm doing optimization is by just going along the gradient directions. And if I look at the gradient directions, gradients are defined by the loss, which depends upon the number of data samples. And if I look at the gradient directions, they are just spanned by the data points. Okay? So there is some residue, but they're always in the span of the data point. So if I have only a small number of data, my gradients are always moving in a small dimensional space. Right? that means my solutions will always lie in a small dimensional space. My updates will always lie in the small dimensional space, and within the small dimensional space there is a unique solution that happens to be the minimum norm solution. Okay? And this is roughly the idea behind, like, at least the implicit bias of local search algorithms, because I'm looking at a very local neighborhood, and the way I'm approaching over the neighborhood is essentially based on the loss, where the loss is over a small number of data points compared to the number of parameters I'm estimating, right? And hence, in some sense, I'm restricting this regions I'm looking into, which gives me an implicit form of bias, and that's what we'll be exploiting for the rest of the talk. Okay, so this was a two-line proof. Let's look at a more interesting example, which we earlier alluded to, which is the matrix completion problem, matrix factorization problem. Okay? So here again, like in the W space, it's just a least squares problem. In the U space, it is not a least squares problem. It's a least squares problem over a different parameterization. And in particular, this particular setting of UV transpose you can think of a two-layered linear network with multiple outputs, but we won't go into the analogy any more than that. But if we recall, we left our previous slide with this previous discussion of this with the slide, where we had 3 different algorithms, 3 different solutions. And if you remember, the first algorithm was just minimizing, doing gradient descent on the W space. And given the previous slide, I already know what that solution is. And that solution is nothing but the minimum L2 norm solution, because I just proved to you that if I did gradient descent on the least squares problem, I converge to a minimum L2 norm solution, right? Or Euclidean norm solution. So the blue bar is clearly the Euclidean norm solution, but clearly the green and red bars, the green and the red bars, are not converging to the minimum Euclidean norm solution. They're converging to something very different. Okay? And more interesting thing is that what the blue and red bars, or in other words, what gradient descent on the factors converge to, seems to depend on the step size. Okay? Whereas when we proved the implicit bias for least squares regression, we said it's independent of the step size. In respect of what step size you use, you will always converge to the minimum L2 norm solution. Whereas here it seems to be dependent on the step size, and in particular the small step size is doing something very special. Okay? And at least when we started this work, like empirically we observed in a lot of problems that this small step size is exactly the solution of explicitly regularized problem. Okay? So you can construct an explicitly regularized problem where the regularizer is now a nuclear norm. So nuclear norm is just another norm over the parameters W, which is known to encourage low rank solutions. Okay? So when we empirically compare the solutions of an explicitly regularized problem, which minimizes the nuclear norm subject to constraints, what we observe is the performance of our solution is very comparable to the minimum nuclear norm solution. And also, if we evaluated our solution for the explicit regularized problems objective, there seems to be this coincidence, which essentially says that at least for this problem, what I converge to seems to be very close to minimum nuclear norm solution.
What is the step size? How did you choose that?
I just set it to something very small.
So you're saying there exists a small fixed step size which seems to match.
Right. And in fact, like if you reduce it smaller, it gets closer and closer. Yeah. And now we know why also, and that's my next slide. So then we can ask the question: does it always happen? When does it happen? What are the conditions under which it happens? And we see that already having a small step size is important. Okay. And so we wanted to formalize it, and you can take mathematically say what small step size means. You can take it infinitely small or some polynomially small. And another thing which seems to be important for this property to hold is to start initializing the parameters close to 0. Okay. So this again we can infer from what we know for squared error, where we saw that the bias towards L2 norm again depended on the parameters initializing close to being 0. Here we cannot initialize quite at 0 because that's a saddle point. But as long as we initialize close to 0, this behavior seems to propagate. And what we showed initially is, at least in the limiting case of these problems, where the initialization is taken to the limit of 0 and the step size is taken to the continuous limit of 0, going to 0. For certain kind of measurements, we do the conjecture, or it was the conjecture at that point. The conjecture does seem to hold. And a later paper actually proved it for more interesting class of measurements, which is pretty much any random measurements, so most matrix completion problems and most matrix sensing problems which are traditionally analyzed. that this conjecture is indeed true. And in fact, like it does, as long as you have a polynomially small step size and polynomially small initialization, I mean, that just means that very small initialization and very small step size, you do converge to a minimum nuclear norm solution. But in a somewhat disappointing way, this does not always hold true because we already see that the characterization is very fragile in a sense of step size I need to go to 0, the initialization needs to go to 0, and this has been proven for only for special cases of special measurements, random measurements. Whereas our original characterization for doing gradient descent on just the least squares objective was super clean. Any step size, any initialization, we know what solution we get to. And here in some sense, it's a lot more complicated for even this small problem. And the reason we started with this problem is like, this is the simplest non-convex problem we actually have a lot of understanding of. Like we know how to solve low rank problems because of the amount of research that has gone into it. And here already we see there are some bottlenecks. Okay? And then, so the other thing which we then realize is like, although we are analyzing squared laws in all these problems, what motivated us to look at this problem was neural networks, and in neural networks the more popular laws to analyze is actually some form of classification laws. Okay? So one version of a classification laws is called logistic laws. So in neural networks people use something called cross entropy laws. That is just a jargon. A logistic laws is also a jargon, but what essentially this looks like is an exponential loss. Right? So what do I have? Instead of my x's are some data points, okay, and y's are plus minus 1 labels, and I want to find a linear parameter w such that if I take the inner product between w and x, the sign of the inner product matches the sign of y. Okay? In that case, this product here will be a positive number, and I want the sign to match at the same time give a large value of the sign. Okay? So if I have a positive data point, I want to find a w such that x times w has a large positive value. Okay? And I'm penalizing it with an exponential penalty whenever the value is small. Exponentially decaying penalty. Okay? Is the loss clear? Okay. So logistic loss is just a more stable way of computing exponential loss, like working with exponential loss, because and it also has some information theoretic connections to some certain kinds of distributional assumptions on the data. So there are a lot of reasons why people use logistic loss, but for this talk, they both behave similarly, and in fact all our results can be extended to logistic loss, but we'll look at exponential loss as a feature. Okay? So now this problem is again, we have an enforced mess in a sense. First thing, one thing you can already see is like this is again a convex problem, but this is a convex problem with no finite minimizers. In other words, if I want to make this loss 0, how do I make this loss 0? I take any w which separates the data, like for example this w here, and take the norm of the w to infinity. Just scale the norm to infinity, and that will be a minimizer of this problem. Right? And in fact, this can be done with any separator. Like for example, all of these separators, I can scale the norm to infinity, and that will be the solution of this problem. Okay? Now, we can ask the question of, if I use some specific algorithms like gradient descent optimizers, which of these separators does it converge to? Okay? And so let's look at what gradient descent does. It's again doing the same gradient updates. Okay? But now we know that if gradient descent is actually minimizing the loss, the norm of the updates have to go to infinity. Okay? But we don't care about the norm of the iterates. What we really care about is actually what is the direction of the update, because that's what determines what my separator is. In other words, even though the gradient descent iterates themselves don't converge, they in fact are diverging in order to minimize the loss. What we really care about is like what the direction converges in. And to begin with, we don't even know if it converges. But if it converges, and we want to see if it converges to something special. And it turns out that it does converge to something special. In particular, if I look at the direction for gradient descent, if I look at the direction, what it converges to happens to be what is called a maximum margin separator. Just to give a visual explanation of what a maximum margin separator is like, if I have two well-separated clusters, a maximum margin separator is a line such that the distance to the closest point is maximized. Okay? And how I measure the distance? If I measure the distance in terms of an L2 norm, or Euclidean norm, what I end up is with this optimization problem in the bottom. Okay? So if my objective is to find a separator which maximizes the L2 norm distance to this closest points, what I end up with is the optimization problem here, which is argmax of like, whatever. You don't have to present it. It's just that it's a mathematical representation of what I just told you. And what we can show is essentially that when I do gradient descent on this logistic loss or exponential loss for that matter, both of them, you do converge, eventually the direction of the iterates converge in the direction of maximum margin separator. Okay? So this is interesting because what are the interesting implications is that even if I initialize, so one thing you will already notice is like this is independent of any initialization and step size. Okay? So as long as we need some conditions like it's bounded and smaller than certain value, for the most part it's independent of step size, but definitely independent of any initialization. In particular, even if I initialize with a separator which is already good in terms of trading loss, right? Just scaling the separator, even if I initialize with a separator with bad margin, just doing gradient descent will push it back to a nice separator. And that's an interesting corollary of this. And even this problem for a convex setting, the proof doesn't fit into two-line and I won't be able to go through it. Okay? So unlike linear regression where the proof was evident, this is like a much more involved proof, but it leads to an interesting corollary. So just to summarize the implicit bias we have seen, the results we have seen so far for gradient descent, we have seen that okay, so for least squares loss, we converge to a minimum L2 norm solution. For logistic loss, we converge to something like which is related to L2 norm. I'm just writing different ways to write it. And however, for this factorization loss, it converges to something like a nuclear norm in the parameter space, at least whenever we could characterize it. While this seems like somewhat of an odd, if you actually look at what this nuclear norm is, this is actually equivalent to minimizing the L2 norm in the parameter space. So there does seem to be a strong connection between what gradient descent is doing and some form of minimizing the Euclidean norm of the parameters. Can we formalize this connection? In other words, what is the relationship between gradient descent and Euclidean norm? Right? Why Euclidean norm? Why not some other norm? Okay? And there the connection seems to be coming, I mean, we look for the connection by looking at how gradient descent is defined. If we can think of gradient descent as a general steepest descent, what we are doing is like we are trying to take a step, but the way we are trying to take a step from the current position is instead of minimizing the loss, I'm minimizing a first order approximation of the loss. Okay? So I can just expand the loss around my current point and look at the first order approximation. Now I can take the gradient descent step as minimizing this first order approximation, but I don't want to just take it too far because it's an approximation. So I minimize this loss subject to some form of penalty for going too far along that. What I'm effectively doing at each point, I'm taking a very measured set of steps. And the way I'm measuring the steps is in Euclidean geometry. Okay? So, and this could be the possible connection which is relating to how it ends up being globally. Okay? And in particular, we can generalize this notion to general steepest descent with L1, with the generic norm, where my penalty for taking a large step is measured in different norms. Okay? For every different norm, we come up with a different algorithm, and a particular interesting case is like if I choose L1 norm, we end up with coordinate descent as an algorithm. And the question is, can we more generally relate the implicit bias to the geometry of the optimization approach? And that we explored for this class of steepest descent algorithms, and where we can actually say that if you go back to the squared loss example, we saw that the gradient descent converges to a minimum closest L2 norm solution. Yeah.
So is there a reason to limit your attention to steepest descent where the penalty function is the square of a norm, or could you have any strongly convex penalty function?
I think it is, we do look at strongly convex penalty function that relates to somewhat like mirror descent. It works for, so we do have some results for mirror descent. The non-homogeneity adds some kind of a problematic issues. So norms being homogeneous is helping us.
Got it.
But we have some understanding of what happens with non-homogeneity. It's not just as clean. Right. So let's look at for the norm version now. So if you look at steepest descent with squared loss, we saw that gradient descent converges to the closest L2 norm solution. Then can we guess that the for general norms, you converge to the closest solution in that norm. Because I kind of gave a hand-wavy argument that I'm doing a small step size in each iteration, so maybe that's why it's giving you a small closest distance in overall norm, right? But at least for squared norm, it doesn't seem to be the case. Okay? So I know this figure is a little hard to parse, but you can think of this blue line in the bottom as set of all global minimizers, and the minimum norm solution is the black star here, and the different paths are essentially like what happens if I choose different step sizes. Right? Already we see that unlike gradient descent, different step sizes lead to different solutions on the blue line. And in particular, even for infinitesimal step size, we don't converge to the minimum norm solution. So this geometry argument doesn't seem to work, at least for squared laws. Okay? And we can also give a more formal analytical functions where you can say that it will depend on step size, even for step size going, initialization going to 0 and step size going to 0. The expected characterization won't go. Right? So this is somewhat disappointing, but what about like, if you look at exponential loss, is the behavior any different? Are we still not going to be able to characterize, or is it something different? And it so happens that if you look at exponential loss, we are able to characterize. In particular, if you remember the max margin solution I was describing earlier, I said if you measure the distance in L2 norm, you converge to a max margin solution of the problem I wrote down. But here it so happens if I do steepest distance with respect to general norm, I converge to a max margin solution where the distances are measured in L1 norms, or the norms corresponding to the steepest distance. Okay? So you converge to a solution which maximizes the distance on the closest point, where the distance here is measured in a different norm. Okay?
So there is some issue you're not raising during this whole talk. I mean, something that gradient descent could depend also on where you start.
Right.
So somehow, did I miss it, or there were no discussion of
Yeah, so
where you converge depends on where you start?
I just mentioned that it doesn't depend for exponential loss, and I'll explain in the next slide why. Okay? And so for squared loss, it does depend, because initially when you characterize for L2 norm, we said it's the closest L2 norm from where we start. Squared loss definitely it depends, and for exponential loss, it doesn't. And this answer seems to be in like, we get some form of simplicity from asymptotics. So the idea is, if you look at what exponential loss is doing, you're finally converging to an infinite solution with infinite norm. Right? From the point of view of where you're converging, all the initial points look like 0. And all step sizes look like, all finite step sizes look like 0. You're converging to you're going to a solution which has infinite norm, and I'm looking at the ratio of the I'm looking at the ratio of your iterate divided by the norm. So the iterates themselves will depend on the initialization, but once I normalize all these factors of initialization, initial step sizes are not dominant. Like the dominant factors come from the gradient geometry. And that's why when these results are correct, asymptotically they are mathematically correct. I'm not hiding anything about the initialization. In fact, for the later results, we do need some kind of assumption on the initialization, but at least for this convex functions, we don't need any assumption on the initialization. And the idea is that we get this kind of simplicity in analysis by looking at these asymptotic solutions, right? And we can precisely, in fact, like there is another line of work where we don't actually analyze, which I won't talk about, where we actually analyze how quickly you converge to this asymptotic solution. That means how quickly you forget where you started with, or like the initial step sizes and so on. And that's that led to some interesting insights too, and which I won't have time to talk about later. But yeah, so because of the asymptotics is why we don't see a dependence on initialization. So we have proved a bunch of things about like mostly convex problems and some very limited non-convex, but what we started with was neural networks, and although I have only like 3 minutes more to go, like I'll briefly not disappoint you or maybe disappoint you. We look at a more interesting special class of the neural networks, which is linear networks. Okay, so this is less interesting because it's still not neural networks. This is more interesting because it's a non-convex problem. It's something which we don't understand completely. Even here we can see some interesting results. And so the linear networks is essentially like where the activations are linear, so I'm just doing a bunch of composition of linear models. Okay? And if I look at the objective here, effectively this model is learning a linear network, linear function. Okay, so I'm optimizing over the same class of function. it's just a very fancy way of writing linear models, where I can just write the beta. Now I'm changing to beta because my parameters are not direct parameters of the original matrix, original function. For each value of parameters here, I can come up with a linear predictor, which is a function of those parameters. Okay? And why do we want to look at it? We want to see how different parameterizations affect different implicit bias. In particular, we want to see different architectures like convolutional networks, not just fully connected. Fully connected networks is like where I just have multiple matrices multiplying each other, and there are no constraints on the matrices. Convolution is where convolution is a particular form of linear operator. If you haven't heard of it, it's just another special linear function where each matrix is constrained to be a convolution filter. So it's a different way of parameterizing the linear function. And it still implements all these constraints still implements only linear functions, so the objective is the same as the linear objective. But what we are going to see is like different parameterizations imply different effective algorithms, because I'm doing gradient descent over different parameters. Okay? And that means they lead to different implicit biases. One thing we won't talk about is like it leads to a non-convex objective, so we know that simple algorithms like gradient descent need not converge to a global minima, but in practice they always do, and there is some theory which actually substantiates that at least for linear networks you will converge to a global minima. But we won't go into those details. That's not the main point of the work. So we'll assume that we'll look at only those runs of gradient descent where you converge to a global minima. Okay? And then can we say something about which global minima you converge to? And I'll just wrap up in 1 minute. To abstract everything out, we'll be looking at functions of this form where it's still a linear function, but the linear function is parameterized by beta of beta subscript w, for each w there is a corresponding linear predictor. For fully connected networks, beta w is specifically given by just the product of component matrices. And in this case, what we can show is that if I do gradient descent over the w space, the iterates, and for each gradient descent iterate, I can correspondingly look at what the function is, what the predictor is, and if I look at what direction the predictor converges in, that still happens to be the maximum margins predictor I earlier talked about with respect to L2 norm. So at least for fully connected networks, irrespective of what the depth of the network is, how many layers of multiplication I add, I still converge to the same logistic regression solution which I talked about long time back. But what is more interesting is that just by merely changing the parameterization to convolution networks, again, convolution networks are something which are very popularly used for vision tasks. Okay, that's the only thing we need to know for this slide. The explicit form looks something more complicated, and it's just a linear function, which a linear parameterization which seems to work very well for vision tasks. Here, something much more interesting happens. The first thing we see is that when I have only 2 layers, what I converge to is actually not the maximum margin solution with respect to L1 norm, but a maximum margin solution where the distance is measured in terms of L1 norm and the frequency components of the predictor. So what does it mean? So L1 norm in general is a good proxy for sparsity. So this network, what gradient descent is trying to converge to is a solution which maximizes the margin when the distance is measured in terms of the L1 norm and the frequency. What it translates to in plain English is that it's trying to find predictors which are sparse in the frequency domain. That in turn implies that it's zeroing out some of the components of the frequency. In other words, it's finding predictors which are only a linear combination of few of the frequency. So it's doing an implicit form of frequency filtering when you just do gradient descent on convolution. This is somewhat interesting because before we started using neural networks for vision tasks, something which we did use was some form of frequency filtered features. So the way we will construct features explicit X was to take the frequency component and filter out some of the components and then give a small set of X. But it is interesting to see that gradient descent on these kind of networks also naturally tend towards those problems. And even more interestingly, if I increase the depth of the network, this bias changes. Right? And as I increase the depth of the network, it seems to be biased towards solutions which are minimizing some LP norm of the frequency components, where P is less than 1. That's a non-convex problem, so you cannot guarantee that it minimizes it. So there is some technicality that it goes to some critical points of the problem. But roughly, the idea is it relates to something, some optimization problem, which is actively trying to minimize the sparsity, increase the sparsity of the frequency predictor. And that was an interesting corollary which we could see even for linear networks. Okay? And just to wrap up, we can generalize this results for any homogeneous polynomials, like where the linear function is parameterized by any homogeneous polynomials, where we can show a version of this kind of implicit bias in the parameter space, but different parameters actually lead to different biases in the original function space. And that's how we end up, why different architectures give us different solutions. And going forward, a common theme which we have exploited in all these results, because I didn't have time to go over the proofs, but a common theme which we have exploited is that showing that the optimization solution eventually reaches a limiting solution of some explicit regularization path. So you can take a deregularizer, you can write an explicit regularization path. And now I can think of what the solutions are for different values of, actually lambda, sorry about the typo there. So different values of lambda, and look at the limiting point of it when there is no regularizer. Okay? And what we end up showing is like optimization solutions correspond to the limit point of some explicitly regularized path, where the regularization is given by the geometry of the parameters and the optimization. And going forward, this is our intuition, and we can try to see if this connection extends for other nonlinear and non-homogeneous models, and does this connection lead to some useful insights we can reason about, and what is the effect of early stopping, which is essentially what if I don't want the global minimum of the original problem, I want to stop early, right? What are those solutions interesting for? And those kind of questions are something which are worth looking into. To summarize, the role, at least hopefully I have convinced you that the role of optimization in learning is not restricted to just finding a global minima, but also to go beyond and say that the optimization implicitly imposes some form of inductive bias, and in many problems that is the main form of inductive bias for the problem. Yeah. Thank you for your attention. Sorry I went too much.
We can take some questions. So for anyone who's not been here before, we also have some refreshments right after the talk, but we'll take some questions now and it does spill over. Yeah, actually, so one big question I had, so if you had multiple layers, are you also saying that the solution to each layer, if I stop it, converges to the 2 over L, the sparse solution?
So are you asking if I
Like, so does this convergence hold for, if I look at each layer individually?
no, maybe, because you do show that you have to think about it. What we show is like the final layer has this kind of convergence. But if I stop early, I think you might, because an intermediate step also shows that every layer equalizes the norm in some sense. So I think if you stop early and look at those functions, they are kind of aligned and I think you might get it.
So effectively, what we are seeing is you're converging to different points of the visualization points simultaneously.
It's possible, but I won't because it's also videotaped, I won't give a for sure answer. Look, I have to think about it. Maybe or maybe, I don't know if each layer also corresponds to just 2 by L or different points along the regularization. So it's possible that I can finally throw away all the layers, just look at the final layer and treat that as a parameters for all the initial layers. So the 2 things can be happening. One is like the intermediate layers are useless in the sense of like I can just replace all the layers with a randomly picked layer. Okay? Or just treat that as a final set of vectors. Right? And whether that makes a difference or not. And that's what I thought doesn't make a difference, because what we effectively show is that the layers are all aligned in the sense that composing them essentially is just amounts to just having a squared version of it, or like a polynomial version. I don't know if that makes too much sense, but yeah, but I have to check it.
Questions?
By homogeneous polynomial, you mean each is a polynomial threshold function also?
So homogeneous polynomial, sorry, I rushed through that. The homogeneous polynomial is like, so I have P of W. If I scale P W by alpha, the function scales as alpha times
So it's the same degree.
same degree over all.
So it's sine of the polynomial from homogeneous polynomial, you get sine of it.
Why do you need sine? Because our loss function doesn't require you to take sines, but yeah, effectively you're doing it because the sign has to match. And when you look at at least logistic type of laws, then the norm goes to infinity, you're effectively taking this.
So in the early part of the slides, you had the histogram where you're like, okay, we're minimizing training data and then you get different test errors, right? So your explanation for why some of them had lower test errors was basically because the solutions were like lower than rank.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess my question is there like any intuition for why that's good? Like why is that?
Okay, because that problem I artificially generated the data from a low rank ground truth matrix.
Okay.
Right? So I knew that the original data comes from the low rank matrix, so I knew what is the correct solution for that problem is. But I didn't tell I didn't just incorporate it into the algorithm. I wanted to demonstrate that the algorithm was implicitly biasing towards that solution. And that was the point of that. So the reason it does well is because I planted a solution.
Okay, so maybe we should take the rest of time next room. So let's thank Surya here.